Deputies, a very warm welcome to you to this meeting of the Board of Deputies, which is a special meeting. And I've never known such an action-packed meeting full of interest and variety. To infuse, enthrall, and stimulate all of you because of the calling of the general election and the timing of the commemoration of 50 years since the Six-Day War. For those who are not deputies, or for those who are and don't remember who I am, I'm Jonathan Arkush, the President of the Board, and for those of you who are not aware, let me remind you that the Board of Deputies is the representative voice of the UK's Jewish community, democratically elected, democratically accountable, and the only body representing our community with legitimacy that comes from your democracy. I would like to offer, apart from my statement, which I won't be repeating the personal matters, but I would like particularly to welcome the new deputies who are here today. The first, Brian Mark from the Jewish Student Chaplaincy in Scotland. Brian, thank you very much for travelling down. And Mark Lewis, UK Lawyers for Israel, who joined the board quite recently. I'd also like to offer a farewell and a thank you to Roger Winfield, one of the deputies for the Liberal Jewish Synagogue, who's stepping down after 17 years. I'm not sure if Roger could be here because I think he had some grandparents' duties this morning for Simcha, but I wish him well. I'd also like to wish David Farby better, as I understand that he's entering hospital today for a big procedure. I'd also like to welcome those of our guests from across the community and beyond who've joined us for the meeting today. All of you are welcome, and welcome to stay and observe the rest of the meeting. So here's what we're going to do. After the hustings, we will be remembering the Six-Day War. And we are very glad indeed and fortunate to be joined by Dr. Yitzhak Ifat. He was one of the first paratroopers to enter Jerusalem. He became one of Israel's most recognizable faces because he was the subject of that iconic image that you will remember of the three paratroopers gazing up to the Kotel HaMa'aravi, the Western Wall. I'm also delighted to announce, and I wasn't able to do so before for the usual security reasons, that the Board of Deputies is going to be very honoured to be joined today by His Excellency Mark Regev, Israel's ambassador to the Court of St. James, who will be delivering an address. And this is the custom of the board at the meeting closest to Yom Ha'atzmaut. Deputies, due to the special nature of this meeting and the rather crammed agenda, we will not be debating divisional reports or my statement, and the usual business will be put over till the next board meeting in July. So if you have questions, please save them up then. And you are very welcome, of course, if there's something pressing, to contact me or any of my honorary officer colleagues before the next meeting. We will be finishing the meeting with a short debate on some organisational matters in the paper which you have before you, to be led by Senior Vice President Richard Verber. Richard, as chair of the International Division, will also chair that part of the meeting devoted to the commemoration of the Six-Day War. And now for the present, and debating the political issues of the day, I'm delighted to introduce to you the 2017 general election Jewish hustings. We are hosting them today for the community with our media partners, the Jewish Chronicle, and we are delighted to have secured the attendance of 4 very senior and distinguished political representatives. Before I introduce them, I'd also like to welcome Cornelia Parker, sitting there, and she is the official artist for the general election. And I'm told that every general election has an official artist. So Cornelia, welcome to you, and we hope that your artistry will present the Board of Deputies amongst the other images which will no doubt become iconic. I'd like to introduce you today in no particular order. First, sitting on Gillian's left, Sajid Javid, Secretary of State for Communities and Local Government since July last year, and the Conservative Party candidate for Bromsgrove. And at the end of the table, on my right, I'd like to introduce you to Baroness Sarah Ludford, the Liberal Democrat spokesperson for exiting the European Union, a vice chair of the all-party parliamentary group on British Jews in the last Parliament. Sarah Ludford. And next to Sarah, Sir Keir Starmer, Shadow Secretary of State for exiting the European Union and Labour's parliamentary candidate for Holborn and St Pancras, which is indeed the constituency in which we are currently sitting. Sir Keir. And on my immediate right, Kirsten Oswald, Scottish National Party candidate for East Renfrewshire, for which she has been the MP since the last election. And East Renfrew is the constituency with the highest number of Jews in Scotland. Kirsten was also a member of the all-party parliamentary group on British Jews in the last Parliament, and she is the SNP spokesman for the Armed Forces. Kirsten Oswald. Thank you all for coming, and we are delighted to see you and look forward to hearing from you. I'm now very pleased to hand over to Gillian Merron, our Board of Deputies Chief Executive, herself a former Member of Parliament for Lincoln and Government Minister, and Gillian will be chairing the hustings.
Thank you very much. Good morning and welcome everybody. I'm delighted to be chairing this very important hustings, and certainly if a week is a long time in politics, then 2 years since the last election is an absolute political eternity. I can hear the sighs on the platform. To our panellists, thank you so much for taking time out of your pressured schedule to be with us this morning. I doubt this is what constitutes a rest, but I hope that at least you get a chance to sit down for a short while. If I might do a very quick advert for the Board of Deputies Jewish Manifesto, which everyone has sight of. This is neatly summarised, as you will know, in the 10 commitments. We don't offer any advice to you about how to vote, but we do ask that you ask your parliamentary candidates for their support for our issues and our concerns. And so, to set out the rules of the game in the hustings. First of all, I'm going to invite each of the panellists to take up to 3 minutes to make an opening statement. When they've all concluded, I will invite concise questions, not statements, from people in the room with us. I'm looking for a healthy mix of speakers who can be deputies or visitors. Everyone is equally welcome to ask their question. I also ask that questions are addressed in such a way that the whole panel is able to answer. And then at the end, panellists will have 1 minute each with which to sum up. And so, in order of first names, we decided, just to mix it up a bit, we will hear from Keir Starmer for Labour, Kirsten Oswald for the SNP, Sajid Javid for the Conservatives, and then Sarah Ludford for the Lib Dems. So if I might first of all invite Keir to take his place. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to be with you this morning. It's a privilege. Welcome to Holborn and St Pancras, which I've had the privilege of representing for the last 2 years. It's been a busy 2 years, which I hope to represent after June the 8th. The central question, it seems to me, in this election is what sort of Britain do we want to live in? And for me, that's all about core values. What are our core values that we want for our future and for the next generation? And I think the most important core values are equality, fairness, and dignity in the context of a world where the values of peace and security, the rule of law, and human rights prevail. Let me start with equality, dignity, and fairness, because this government's been in place for 7 years. 7 years. A lot can be achieved in 7 years. Just think about 1945. Think about 1997. Yet, what do we have? We've got 6 million people living in a place where they're not earning the living wage. We've got 4 million children living below the poverty threshold. We've got real wages down since 2010, an ongoing crisis in the NHS and social care that nobody can pretend isn't there, underlining bad underfunding and decision-making. And I've run a public service. I ran a frontline public service for 5 years. And I know that you can't take 30, 40% out of our public services and pretend that you're running the same public service. We have a continuing housing crisis. In Holborn and St Pancras, I run a very busy surgery every other week. And every other person that comes is living in Camden in a one-bedroom flat, 2 adults, 3 children. That is absolutely classic here in Camden. Families of 2 parents, 3 kids in a one-bedroom flat. And they now come to the surgery with a note from the school saying that the eldest child is failing at school because of the circumstances. 21st century Britain in Camden. Up the road this afternoon, I'm going to Lancing Street Food Bank. Within 400 yards of where we're sitting now is a food bank, a busy food bank. Anybody who wants to go up there, please come and visit it. 21st century Britain after 7 years of this government. That's why Labour set out a bold, radical response based on those core values. Now, I accept it has to be costed. It will be costed. But do we really live in a Britain that can't afford those core values going forward? Let me turn then to the wider world, because I don't think we've lived in more turbulent times internationally than we are in at the moment. I wanted to stay in the EU. This time last year I was going around the country campaigning for us to stay in. I thought it would be better for trade, for the work I was doing on criminal justice and counter-terrorism. But mainly I did it because my core values are internationalism, and I think that we achieve more when we collaborate with our partners in face of threats across the world and where we take advantage of opportunities together. Now, I accept the result of the referendum, but I want us to negotiate a different relationship with the EU, but one that's based on partnership, not membership, but partnership. And my great fear is that the extreme position being taken by the Prime Minister, where she's taken virtually all of the options off the table before we started negotiations, and is in belligerent mood, has set the wrong tone and approach for what is necessary for our country. And so I say, thank you, I say put the national interest first, not party interest. The future is at stake. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I believe it's the first time that a SNP politician has been asked to be part of this event, and it is a real honour to be asked to come here today and to join you, and in such esteemed company too. And particularly after a period of 2 years when we've seen a very strong block of SNP MPs in Westminster acting as the real effective opposition to the government, which is a particularly important role. It's also been a huge honour for me to represent, as we heard, the majority of Scotland's Jewish community over the past 2 years. And I know all politicians say this, but I believe that my local area is very special. And it's special because of that great diversity and the people and the communities who live there. And one of the things that makes it particularly unique and special is the presence of this largest Jewish community in Scotland. And as well as the organisations, the community groups, the fantastic places to eat, all the things that go with a thriving, vibrant Jewish community, it's also been particularly edifying to see the building of Europe's first shared campus primary school, which will be a Jewish and Catholic shared campus. And I think it does bode well for the future that our Scottish Jewish community is putting down such strong roots going forward, just as it did in the past. Because it's really important to our success as a country that our Scottish Jewish community thrives. And there are a number of organisations doing great work locally, and it's been a pleasure to get to know them and to work with them as they progress issues that really matter to local people in our Jewish communities, and to build the community and the kind of Scotland that we want to live in. And I think that is particularly important now, more than at any other time in my life, because we do need to do everything possible to cement the relationships within our communities, between our communities and across our communities. Because undeniably, these are tense times, and that tension can bring threats, real threats, or the worry of threats. And I know from people in my local area and also from the CST how prevalent and far-reaching the threats and the issues of anti-Semitism and of harm are. My own children can go to school, they can go to their youth organisations, and we don't for a second think that there are any security needs or issues surrounding that. But I know now only too well that that isn't the reality for others, and that is not acceptable. Because there can be no equivocation. There aren't any grey areas in this. Anti-Semitism and all forms of racism are always to be deplored and condemned. There is no place in Scotland for anti-Semitism, and there's no place anywhere for anti-Semitism. To conclude, as an MP, I was in the position where I could have taken up the opportunity to travel to various places in the world as part of my job. And I chose not to do that. I felt my constituency and my brief were more important. But I did make one exception. At the end of last year, I was part of the first ever SNP delegation to Israel and Palestine. That was an extraordinary visit. It was a privilege, and it's given me an insight that I will take with me as I hope to continue my work over the next 5 years. Thank you.
Good morning. Let me first thank the board for holding these hustings and inviting me to represent the Conservative Party. Let me also take this opportunity to thank the board for all that it does to promote a better understanding of the concerns and the interests of the British Jewish community. Concerns and interests that the Conservative Party has long understood, particularly the need to fight and have a zero-tolerance approach to anti-Semitism in all its forms and to protect the Jewish way of life. I was here 2 years ago in 2015. I didn't think I'd be back so soon, to be honest. And I think that applies for all of us. But let me explain in just a couple of moments why we are having this election and also why it's so important. First of all, the why. A lot's changed in the last 2 years. Of course, the biggest change has been the vote to leave the European Union. No matter what our views in that debate, the decision has to be made. It has to be honoured. That is not the view throughout Westminster, though. You will find today that the Labour Party doesn't have a single view. You'll hear one from Keir. It is not shared by the vast majority of his colleagues. You will also find that the Liberal Democrats want to have another referendum, and there's members of the House of Lords that, in their own words, have said they want to stall the entire business of government. That is why the government needs a fresh mandate, and if Theresa May wins, she will have that mandate to negotiate the best deal for the United Kingdom. That's why we are now having this general election. Of course, also, when we have this general election, I think it's very important to understand it's not just a government that you're electing for the next 5 years. Normally in a general election, if you don't like what the government's done, you've got the right in 5 years to change it and perhaps reverse some of those policies. The negotiations, the outcome of those negotiations are going to last for generations. They're going to impact everything we do in this country, virtually every aspect of public policy. And that's why this general election is particularly important. It will have a long-lasting impact for generations, not just on you, but your children and grandchildren way beyond the next 5 years. And that is worth thinking about. And lastly, of course, this election is about a lot more than the Brexit negotiations. Most of all, we all want to protect our vital public services, be it the NHS, education, funding for infrastructure, the defence of our country, so many things that we hold important. Each one of those has its separate challenges, but there's one thing that unites all of them. They all require money. And that money can only be generated by a strong economy. That's why you need a government that believes in business, will back business so we can generate the funds to help all those public services. The choice is clear in this general election. on June the 9th, the day after the election, it can either be Theresa May standing outside 10 Downing Street leading a strong and stable government in the national interest, or it can be Jeremy Corbyn leading a coalition of chaos and instability and a floundering, weak leadership. That's your choice.
Okay. Liberal Democrats believe that this election should be a contest and not a coronation, and I'll be very happy to take up specific election issues and questions. But I just wanted, in my opening, to give an idea of why I, not Jewish, with no family links to Israel, ended up as Vice Chair of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on British Jews and as a Vice President of Liberal Democrat Friends of Israel, and why I believe that liberalism and Liberal Democrats deserve support for our core mantra of open, tolerant and united. Last night, rather than watching Eurovision, partly because my husband can't stand it, but also because I wanted to re-watch this film, I saw Woman in Gold on BBC, a moving telling of a vitally important story of Holocaust restitution. I did some work when I was a member of the European Parliament to support such efforts, and I believe those efforts are completely insufficient. But it's a reflection, my commitment to this issue is a reflection of my determination that never again is a reality. My own personal commitment to anti-Semitism, along with that of my party, as demonstrated recently very forcefully by my leader, Tim Farron. Anti-Semitic dangers come from various directions, from Islamism as well as from the far right. But Tim was living up to our party's guiding principles, expressed as a society at home and abroad offering respect, safety, diversity and cooperation, rooted in human rights and sustainable development, fighting prejudice, discrimination, extremism and hate crime of all sorts. We believe that it's increasingly clear that the political spectrum stretches from liberalism on one end to populism at the other, not conventional left and right. The international dangers show worrying echoes of the 1930s. Liberal Democrats believe that international and European cooperation on the basis of values as well as material interests is essential. My first trip to Israel nearly 40 years ago was a result of a scholarship from the Anglo-Israel Association, which I saw advertised in the Times. And I studied Israel's relationship with the then EEC, stayed in the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I saw a quote recently from Claudia Roden, who said, "Food is not just nourishment of the soul, but also to build links between communities." She said, "There is an Arab saying that if you have shared food with someone, you can never betray them. So perhaps it was that falafel in pitta that was my staple diet in Jerusalem that led me to fight as an MEP against boycotts against Israel and for the security and respect for integrity of Israel."
So thank you very much to all of our panellists. Can I see who might like to be asking questions? Well, we're obviously going to run out. And so I'm going to pick 3 people and ask you to come to the mic. And as you're coming up, I'll remind you of the rules. So I'm just going to stand so that I can see properly. There's somebody right at the back, the gentleman there, if you'd like to come forward. The lady here, and the gentleman there, if you'd like to come forward. A reminder, this is a gentle reminder, that brevity will get you great popularity with the audience, and please address the questions so that the whole panel can reply to them, please.
all of you, all four of you, my name is Irene Mansfield, I'm not now a member of the Board of Deputies. All four of you are blessed or cursed with very high-profile leaders. I'd like to get off the subject of leaders and ask you about a particular aspect of policy, which is your policy on the Human Rights Act and human rights and criminal justice in particular.
Thank you very much. Kirsten, would you like to start?
I think that the question of human rights is a very fundamental one.
You need to be nearer the mic.
I hope you can hear me now.
Yeah. It's on.
Okay. I think that the question of human rights is a very fundamental one. I think it goes to the heart of who we are as a society, and it does speak to who we want to be as groups of people and as a country. It's something that's particularly important in Scottish political discourse, because the way that we present ourselves, the way that we look after our groups in our country and in our society is fundamental to the kind of place that we will be going forward. So human rights are something that we are very focused on. We would absolutely always support as many regulations, laws, and of course the Human Rights Act as possible. And these are the areas that we are working on at all times.
Sarah.
Liberal Democrats are utterly committed to the maintenance of the Human Rights Act, as well as Britain's membership of the European Convention on Human Rights. We regret very much the way that it has been pilloried and made an object of ridicule. We don't think there's anything funny about non-respect for human rights, and we very much hope that this idea, which keeps getting trotted out from the Conservative Party, will finally be kicked into the extremely long grass.
Well, I'm really glad this question's come up here with this audience. I've acted as a human rights lawyer for many, many years. That's what I did in practice. And the Human Rights Act incorporates the European Convention of Human Rights. And the European Convention of Rights, like so many other instruments, was drafted in the aftermath of the Second World War and the Holocaust. And for me, it was such a moment. It was the world coming together to say, never again will we allow these sorts of atrocities to be done within one state without international accountability. That is the absolute root and underpinning of the European Convention. That's why we have a European court. It's so that states are answerable to each other. The Labour Party incorporated that in our law. It's a very good thing. Nobody should be seduced by the idea that the Tories are putting forward that to get rid of the Human Rights Act is to improve it. If you want to improve human rights, bank the Human Rights Act, and I'll sit down and draft even further rights that we can add to it. But don't be seduced by the idea that once you tinker and change, you're improving human rights, because you won't. These are fundamental, absolutely fundamental rights. And as Lord Bingham said in a famous speech, when you go through them, right to life, freedom from torture, fair trial, etc., which of these rights do you not want? They're central. We must defend them in everything that we do.
Thank you.
I think we can all be very proud that under successive governments, ever since the end of the Second World War, starting with Britain's own role, as Keir has just said, in framing the European Convention on Human Rights and the role particularly Winston Churchill played, we can be proud that our country has been a champion of human rights, not just at home, but abroad as well. It is something as Conservatives, I think the last 7 years in office have demonstrated this as well, have been absolutely fundamentally committed to in every shape and form. And I think it's also particularly important with this audience to highlight the right for every one of us to practice a religion or not to practice a religion. And if we do choose to do so, we must be protected in the ways that we choose to carry out our religion.
Thank you. If you'd like to give your name and a very brief question.
Brian Humphreys, Pro-Zion Deputy, but really speaking as a member of the Board of Deputies Social Action Group. The Dubs Amendment, when it was passed, accepted that up to 3,000 refugee children would be allowed into the UK, single unaccompanied children. So far, only 350 have been allowed in. I want to ask whether the parties represented on the stage would allow the full amount that we expected to be allowed under that amendment.
Thank you. Sarah.
Sorry, the short answer is absolutely yes. I think we think it's disgraceful the way the government has broken its promise, and applaud the original work of Alf Dubs, a colleague in the Lords, for securing that promise, and the way it is betrayed is a huge disappointment. Liberal Democrats would not only respect the promise of 3,000 children, but also give them indefinite leave to remain, so they would not be deported at 18. And I also add that we would commit to taking 50,000 resettled Syrians over 5 years of a parliament through safe and legal routes, so that they don't have to die in the oceans and so on.
Thank you. Sajid.
As has just been referred to, we have in this country accepted some of the most vulnerable refugees, including, of course, children. Of course, that is absolutely right. But what we have also done as a country, ever since the conflict in Syria started, is that we have been the most generous country by far of any other developed country in the world in supporting refugees across the world, including near Syria, the camps in Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and other places. We've given over £1 billion in aid, not matched by any other country in Europe, second only to the United States. And I think that is something we should also continue, because that's another way of helping refugees that are suffering from this terrible crisis and this awful war.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Thank you. Yes, is the brief answer to that. These are unaccompanied child refugees. Each one of these words should make us all stop and think about things very seriously. The refusal to take these children in is an affront to all of us. It's certainly an affront to common decency and humanity. Scotland is welcoming to refugees. We are delighted to have refugees coming to live in our country. Communities all over Scotland are taking refugees in. I see businesses being opened by refugees who've come and settled very recently. And I have to say, surely, Sajid, surely we can do much better than that.
The answer to the question is yes, and Sajid didn't say yes. And it's disgraceful. It's disgraceful. Let me remind people what lay behind Alf Dubs' amendment. I led for Labour on this. The concern that led to the amendment was this. It was thought that 10,000 children who'd arrived on their own in Europe had gone missing. That was an underestimate. These are children that were going into the hands of the most dangerous people who were manipulating and exploiting them all over Europe. I went to the refugee camps in Calais and Dunkirk. I went from St Pancras, it's 1 hour on the train, and I saw kids in tents, in a mess, in the slush, in the freezing cold, the same age as my kids, aged 8 and 6. And they were there, and my kids were in their bedroom in Kentish Town in the warm, simply because of where they'd been born. It is disgraceful that we're not doing more. It is disgraceful that we have got a policy that is essentially, if you've arrived somehow in Europe, you don't need our protection. That is completely unacceptable. We have a two-tier system. We have Syrian refugees, and I absolutely accept that what the government's done on the official Syrian refugee programme is very, very good, and some of the families have been relocated in Scotland, and I've visited them. That's very good, but we've got Syrian refugees and other refugees, and we're distinguishing between different sorts of refugees, and we're not doing the right thing by children. The right answer to this is yes.
Thank you.
I'm David Pearl. I'd like to ask, I'm not a deputy, by the way. I'd like to ask the members on the panel about our broken housing. We have house price inflation, which seems to be accepted. Other inflation is not accepted. What do you propose to do to mend our housing, which is ridiculous now?
Thank you. So I'll first of all come to Sajid.
Yeah, no, thank you. We have a housing crisis in this country. The housing market is broken. I've looked at this very carefully as the local government secretary, and that's why we recently published a housing white paper which recognises this properly, and the fundamental problem, there's lots of issues, it's a complex issue, but the fundamental problem is that we need a greater supply of homes, not just the so-called affordable homes, which play a very important role, those that are supplied by our councils or social housing, and we announced a commitment today to build thousands and thousands more of those, but also just generally because prices keep rising because demand is much higher than supply. So we need to put into place these measures that will fix the market, which means making more land available in the appropriate places where there's actually demand. It means supporting the more diversified market, so more smaller builders, for example. Ours is very heavily dominated by the larger builders. And also it means diversifying the market by looking at more modern methods of construction. This hasn't been looked at for years. Under Labour, at the end of their government, house building reached its lowest level since the 1920s, its lowest levels peacetime. It's up 60% since then, but there's a lot more to do, and only the Conservatives can deliver it.
Kirsten.
Thank you. And we have a slightly different perspective, I think, in Scotland. It is also absolutely crucial for us that people do have an appropriate provision of suitable homes, and it is such a fundamental thing for people that, you know, we all have our homes, and it's very important for those coming after us to also be able to settle in our communities, to raise their families, and to be able to do that in the locations perhaps where they themselves have grown up. I would point you to the Scottish Government's record on houses and house building, and we have well exceeded our targets for house building, and they were very significant targets in the first place. And that's a contrast to the previous Labour administration in Scotland, which I believe built 6 houses in their final term of office. It isn't good enough. It's really important for us to have this as a key priority, because we do want our communities to thrive across Scotland. That can be geographical communities, but it can also be faith-based communities too. So for all these reasons, it is very important to us that we continue on this path that we've been following.
Keir.
Thank you very much. It is fundamental that everybody has somewhere to live that is secure and affordable. And we don't have that. I gave an example in my opening. It's a real example. It's here in Camden. Mum, dad, 3 kids, 1-bedroom flat. And in Camden, it takes 5 years to move from a 1-bedroom flat to a 2-bedroom flat. In Camden, when Frank Dobson was first elected 38 years ago now, he was arguing for bus drivers and train drivers to be able to afford it to live in this constituency. I'm now arguing for doctors and nurses to be able to live in this constituency because the prices are too high. And I'm sorry, it's simply not good enough to keep reaching back and say, well, the last Labour government of over 7-8 years ago didn't do X, Y, Z. People don't want to hear that. They want to know what has not happened in the last 7 years that should have happened in the last 7 years, because nothing has changed. There's proposals today out from this government about what it will do. What's been happening in the last 7 years? There are obvious things that could be done very quickly that would unlock the problem. Let local councils borrow to build houses that are affordable to people in their area. Camden would do it at the drop of a hat if it was allowed to do it. We've been asking for years. Stop telling me what Labour did or didn't do years and years ago, and tell me what you're going to do now.
Sarah.
Yes, we certainly do have a dysfunctional housing market, and Liberal Democrats would make housing one of our priorities for infrastructure investment, and we would consider public initiatives if the market refuses to boost the supply to 300,000. I think we also need, particularly in London, to find ways to stop buy to leave, where flats are built often off-plan, speculatively, left empty, which I think is an insult, frankly, but nothing against international investors, but at least rent out the property. And we need to, I think, look at that. We would also keep under review, as part of a general look at business and corporate taxation, something we've long been interested in, which is land value taxation, to actually try and deter house builders than just sitting on banks of land. And finally, we have helped action, particularly my colleague Ollie Grender in the Lords, to stop rip-off tenancy fees by agents.
Thank you. So, who now would like to ask some questions? Oh my goodness, there's even more. Yeah, Susan. And the gentleman back there, yes. No, in the middle. No, sorry, yes. Robert, and let's have a look, somebody from the front. Simon. Thank you for your brevity, everybody.
Susan Pascoe. Only one of our panellists has so far mentioned boycott, sanction, divestment campaigns against Israel. Can I ask our panellists please to comment firstly on their party's position in relation to Israel, and secondly, their party's stance in relation to the boycott, divestment, sanction campaigns against Israel? Thank you.
Thank you. Let's start with Keir.
Thank you very much. We believe, and I believe, in a two-state solution through negotiation, and that's a secure Israel living in peace and a viable Palestinian state through negotiation, not through conflict. And I think that requires all of us on all sides to condemn any act by anybody that undermines the possibility of that peaceful solution of the situation. And I think we should be very, very strong about this in terms of human rights and international law. As far as boycotts are concerned, neither I nor the Labour Party support them.
Thank you. Sarah.
Thank you very much. Yes, Liberal Democrats also remain committed to a negotiated peace settlement to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which of course includes a two-state solution. In this context of conflict, we do not believe that boycotts of one side or another, which play to this idea that there's only one side to blame for the conflict, are at all helpful. Personally, in the European Parliament, I helped secure an extension of the EU-Israel trade agreement to create a single market in pharmaceuticals, which is win-win because it cut the price of pharmaceuticals by cutting all the red tape. It was good advert for the single market and why it's so essential to remain a member here, a member of this EU single market, not some kind of weaselly access. And personally, just lastly, Chair, if I may, I went some years ago to the invitation of the Israeli embassy to a performance by an Israeli theatre company at the Globe of The Merchant of Venice. The Merchant of Venice, which was boycotted. Can you believe it?
Kirsten.
Thank you. I think that in terms of the party, the SNP's position in the Middle East is very clear. We are very much in favour of a two-state solution. We think that that is the best way to achieve long-lasting peace in the region. And I know that Nicola Sturgeon, our First Minister, has been very clear on our position on Israel, which I think is also key. She has said that Israel has a right to exist and a right to exist peacefully. And that's very important for our Jewish communities to hear. In terms of BDS,
if there's heckling, I'll heckle you, so just be warned, Kirsten.
Thank you. In terms of BDS, our Scottish Government does not support BDS.
Thank you. And Sajid.
The boycott, disinvestment and sanction campaign is wrong, full stop. First, let me just talk about my own experience in trying to combat those that wish to boycott Israel and those associated with Israel. When I was Culture Secretary, I told the Tricycle Theatre that it was wrong to ban the Jewish Film Festival. When I was Business Secretary, far from trying to boycott trade with Israel, we tried to boost it in every way that we can, and it's up 60% in the last 5 years. And now, as Local Government Secretary, I instituted a ban on local councils, which is going through now, and if we're re-elected, we will make sure it's adopted and becomes statutory, that stops local councils from joining in a boycott of any country, and of course, including Israel. Local councils cannot and should not have their own foreign policy. Now, when I announced that policy back in November of this last year, the Labour spokesperson said, and I quote, "Town halls have a right to boycott." That was actually, last year, a quote from the Labour spokesman to the government's policy. And Keir, I'm afraid it's just not right when you say the Labour Party does not support boycotts of Israel. It's just wrong, and you are misleading these good people. It is not right. Let me quote Jeremy Corbyn, Jeremy Corbyn has said when asked about the BDS campaign, and he said, and I quote, he said, BDS is part and parcel of a process to be adopted. And when he was asked about it again, he said, and I quote, I believe sanctions against Israel are an appropriate way of promoting the peace process. That's Labour's position, and if Labour were ever near power, they would boycott Israel.
Hang on 1 second. I'm going to ask the audience, would you like a response from Keir? I think that's a yes, Keir.
Thank you very much.
Keep it brief.
Thank you very much. I'll be really brief. The Labour Party is a big party with many views. I was putting the...
Exactly. So which one will prevail after the election?
Hold on.
This deserves
We're
a
not
mature
actually in
response.
Parliament, so... Keir.
Labour Party policy is against boycotts. Labour Party policy is against boycotts, and I'm against boycotts. And this business of saying, well, Jeremy may have said this, that, or the other, is not the way to conduct political discussion and debate. Labour Party adopts policy as a party, and we have a party policy on this, and it's absolutely clear. And we don't help by engaging in this juvenile throwing of phrases around that doesn't take the thing as soon as it should.
Okay. I'm going to invite Robert to ask a question to settle us a little. Robert.
I'm not sure it will.
Okay. Get it going again.
Robert Fessenstein, Deputy for Prestwich Hebrew Congregation in Manchester. Following on, coincidentally from the last question, there has been a disturbing trend in recent years of conferences described as discussing peace in the Middle East when there are nothing of the sort. There was one going to be in Southampton which was cancelled. There was one more recently in Exeter, and I believe there was one in Dublin. What does the panel think about allowing these conferences which more promote hate than they do peace taking place either in local authority or government premises?
Thank you. I'll invite Sajid to start the response.
Thank you. Well, I think such conferences, I mean, first of all, of course, going back to what we asked earlier about human rights, one of our human rights is freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and that should be totally respected. But that doesn't stop one from having a view on the conferences. I think the conferences are divisive and wrong, and any political party or political leaders that have supported such conferences are wrong to do so as well. And this obviously relates to the boycott issue, because I would like a bit of a response to that. If Keir is saying that the Labour Party's policy is now not to support the boycotts, will he confirm today that if Labour is elected, that will they continue with this government's policy of banning local councils from boycotting Israel, yes or no, because that is not current party policy?
Kirsten.
Thank you. I'm interested in some of the language that you've used, because I think it's absolutely crucial to what you're asking about. You talk about, you begin to talk about promoting peace in the Middle East, which obviously is a very positive and well worthwhile endeavour, but then you explain that it is, in fact, an issue where people are promoting hate. And I think that comes down to the absolute crux of what you're asking about. Anything and anybody who is promoting hate, in whatever context, is to be condemned, and it is our job here on this podium to absolutely condemn that kind of behaviour wherever and whenever we see it.
Keir.
I support free speech and freedom of assembly. Of course I do, as a human rights lawyer and advocate of human rights. But that speech and that assembly is not unlimited. There are limits to what can be said, and those limits are clear. And hate speech, and extreme hate speech, is unacceptable and shouldn't be promoted. And I think in terms of anti-Semitism in particular, when we talk of zero tolerance, zero tolerance, we should mean zero tolerance. And I mean that in this constituency, I mean that in this country, and I mean it in my own party. So let me be absolutely clear. Zero tolerance is not just two words. It means that you come down particularly hard on particular words and behaviour in order to demonstrate how abhorrent it is and to ensure that it doesn't, it can't be encouraged and go further than it's already gone. So zero tolerance. As I've said now a number of times, both I and my party are against boycotts. We will have a manifesto launch on Tuesday, and we'll answer all questions then. Thank you.
Sarah.
I agree with what colleagues have said about free speech, but free speech has limits, and those limits include incitement to terrorism and violence. And wasn't John McDonnell was seen on a platform recently with the flag of, was it Hamas or Hezbollah? I'm sorry, I ought to remember that. No, and Hamas, I think. And I think politicians need to be very careful in who they associate with, as well as the words that they use. There's been a real problem of Israeli or pro-Israeli speakers on campuses in this country. I was very glad to see that Ambassador Regev went to SOAS recently. SOAS seems to have a continuing problem, and it is up to the university authorities to carefully parole that boundary between free speech and the legitimate exchange of different views and...
As I say, can we
I agree.
hang on?
I agree. I don't
Sarah,
think
can you
they
just
do
finish
sufficiently.
now? Thank you. Simon.
Simon Hockhauser, I'm the deputy for Southampton Synagogue and indeed an erstwhile Labour Party supporter. And my question is directed to you, Sir Keir Starmer. You were the only party representative in the introductory remarks that did not mention anti-Semitism. How do you expect anybody in this room or in the wider Jewish community, or indeed any supporter of the Jewish community, to vote for your party, which despite your rhetoric on zero tolerance, has shown itself to be totally tolerant of anti-Semites and anti-Semitic views, and whose leader, the candidate for Prime Minister...
I think we've got the question, Simon.
...described himself as the friend of Jew
We have
haters
the
in
question.
Hamas and Hezbollah.
Thank you. Can I... As I set out at the beginning, questions are for all of the panel, so you will construct from Simon's question on anti-Semitism a response. I am absolutely confident, and I'm going to start with Kirsten.
Thank you. I think I would reflect back what I said at the beginning, and I think that there's just no room for any kind of grey area here. There's no room for any kind of doubt or playing with words. Anti-Semitism is unacceptable. It's always unacceptable. It's unacceptable wherever and whenever it raises its head, and it must always be condemned. And it is absolutely our responsibility every single day, anyone who holds elected office, to make sure that that's what they stand for, and to make sure that that's how they live, and to make sure that they make other people behave in that appropriate way too.
Keir.
Thank you very much. In my opening remarks, I talked about basic values. I have fought for those basic values all my life. I'm not just saying them now this morning in this constituency. I've fought for them all my professional life, and that includes fighting against anti-Semitism. Every step of the way for years and years, ever since I was at university, I've committed my life to upholding human rights and defeating that kind of hatred and intolerance. And that's why I've fought for human rights and so upheld the principles. So before we get to any question of the party, my personal position is absolutely clear, I hope. I use the word zero tolerance because I think it's really important for my party to hear those words. The Labour Party has fought anti-Semitism for years. It pains me that in the last 2 years there is an association or discussion even about my party and anti-Semitism, and that's why I've been very clear that must be zero tolerance. And that's why when people like Ken Livingstone make the remarks that he should, I said he should have been expelled, because I think zero tolerance means zero tolerance. It means that you take decisive action. And I accept that it's for the Labour Party to keep on demonstrating that commitment, and I will keep on saying it over and over again, not just for this election, because I believe it deeply and have all my adult life.
Thank you. Sarah. And if I could ask if we could be brief, as we are drawing to a close, sadly.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, my party has had a few problems, has not always dealt with them quite as quickly and expeditiously as I would have liked, but I was therefore completely delighted that we've recently had one individual who was pushed, or jumped just before she was pushed, and another who was removed of his position as a general election candidate by Tim Farron. There may be issues. I'm happy to discuss that with you afterwards, and there may be, disciplinary things to look at within the party. but I believe that Tim Farron displayed the kind of decisive determination on this, which unfortunately, and I haven't done too much cross-party criticism, but Labour has been incapable of doing with Ken Livingstone and others.
Thank you. And Sajid.
I've suffered from racism, and of course it's horrible, it's wrong. And all forms of racism, of course, including anti-Semitism, are completely unacceptable, and we should have a zero-tolerance approach. This government has a proud record of fighting anti-Semitism, everything from our hate crime strategy, something that I'm proud to lead through my current department, which we can always learn from and do better, our safeguarding of Jewish schools and synagogues and nurseries and colleges and the funding we provide for that, for one of the first countries in the world to commit to the new International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance's new definition of anti-Semitism to make sure it's up to date, and of course the support and the work I lead for the government on the new National Holocaust Memorial and Education Centre. But it has to be said, but it is clear and it is obvious, the Labour Party does have a problem with anti-Semitism. And I say that in all sincerity, first of all, accepting everything Keir said about himself. He has been a champion of equality and human rights, and I don't doubt for 1 second there's not a tiny part of Keir would have any truck with anti-Semitism. But he will not be the leader of the Labour Party if they win the election. It's the leader of the Labour Party that has said time and time again that he is friends with Hezbollah and Hamas. We prescribed Hezbollah. He calls them his friends. They had a whitewash inquiry into anti-Semitism that was condemned by everyone, including the chief rabbi. And then, as we've heard, they refused to throw out Ken Livingstone when they had the chance. We know where the Labour Party stands for this, and the country is not with them.
Much as we'd like to keep our panellists here for the entire day, and we could, unfortunately we're not going to, but I'm going to invite each one of them to wind up for no more than 1 minute, and it will have to be no more than 1 minute, and in a different order to how we started. I'm therefore going to ask Sarah to lead, if you would.
Here or there?
Whatever you like.
Here, yeah, okay. Well, thank you very much indeed for a very stimulating discussion and a fantastic opportunity for discussion with the Jewish community, and well done to Gillian for chairing in sometimes slightly controversial circumstances. I think this general election, it is absolutely essential to demonstrate that Britain, which has faced internal divisions as well as external challenges in what I described as dangerous international times, can try and come together and make sure that we have a thriving democracy which has its weaknesses at the moment. And I don't believe that the giving one party some kind of free pass to Downing Street would represent that. My party has explicitly said, in what you might think is an unusual expression of modesty, that we aim to be the real opposition in this country.
Thank you, Sarah. Sajid.
The morning after the election, only one person can stand outside 10 Downing Street and be the leader of our great country. Only one of those people has an unblemished record and a proud record of standing up against hate crime of every form, including anti-Semitism and protecting the Jewish way of life. Only one of those leaders will lead a party that is unashamedly pro-business, understanding if you back business, Britain succeeds and we can afford all those vital public services. And only one of them is capable of leading a successful exit from the European Union. So your choice is, it's Theresa May, strong and stable, or coalition of chaos, Jeremy Corbyn. That's your choice.
Thank you. Kirsten.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that I was able to be here today. I've taken the day away from the campaign trail to do that, but it's been really important for me to come here, and it was really important for my party that I was able to come and represent the SNP. I really also appreciate the questions that you've put to us. They've been very interesting and broad-ranging, and I think that comes down to the fundamentals of what this general election is about. And for me, it's about what kind of Scotland people who live near me want to live in, and what kind of parliamentarians they want to send to Westminster. I think that they will want to send back strong voices to Westminster focused on our communities and with that history of being an effective, a coherent and a strong opposition. And for me, the Scottish Jewish community is absolutely key to that, and it is an integral part of our society. Because Scotland is better, it's stronger, and our children's futures are better and stronger because of our Scottish Jewish community and for having that vibrant, thriving Jewish part of us in Scotland. So I'm delighted to be with you so that we can build a bridge between this community here and our Scottish Jewish community.
Thank you. And Keir.
Thank you very much. On the 24th of June last year, the day after the referendum, my attention was on my 8-year-old boy and my 6-year-old girl. I was exhausted and upset by the result of the referendum, and I just asked myself, what world are they going to grow up in? That was my central concern, and it is my concern. And I want a world that's driven by values, not sound bites. Values, not sound bites. All we've had is sound bite. Brexit means Brexit. No deal's better than a bad deal. No running commentary. Strong and stable. Behind these half sentences, where are the values? Where's the future? The government doesn't need a mandate going forward. It doesn't need more votes in Parliament for a mandate. It wants to crush any opposition. And I know from making difficult decisions in my life, both as a lawyer and as DPP, that the best decisions are the decisions that are held up to the light and tested and challenged. This Prime Minister wants a majority that means she doesn't have to do that process. That is very dangerous for our country.
Thank you to all our panellists, and I'm inviting Jonathan Arkush, President, to give a vote of thanks.
I'm delighted to thank our candidates. Today, let me say, I was proud of our country, proud of our democracy, and proud of the board for being able to host this hustings. I do want to thank very, very sincerely the representatives from the parties. Kirsten has taken a day out and come here all the way from Glasgow in the middle of a busy election campaign, and it is... And it is Sunday, and I think we should show our appreciation. I'm grateful also to Sajid, who's come from the Midlands, Keir Starmer, who's come, we're staying within his constituency, but he could have been at a constituency event today, and Sarah Ludford, all friends of our community. We promised you some education, some fire, some interest, and you've held our attention, and we are particularly grateful to you for taking time out to speak to us. Thank you very much. And I just want to add for our candidates, all of you can take away with you a copy of the Jewish manifesto produced by the Board of Deputies for this election, as with the last election, and as we did for the local elections. It contains the communities. The community is a place of broad views, but we have consensus on some key issues, and we are asking the parties to look at our 10 commitments and to sign up to them. We hope you will. We hope you'll take them back. Thank you.
There will now be a changeover as we move to the next part of the meeting, which I hope you will stay for if you can, which is the commemoration of the 1967 war. So if you just give us a few minutes, thank you.
Thanks very much.
Deputies, please do take your seats. Please do take your seats. We are ready to continue with the commemoration of the Six-Day War. Deputies, final invitation. Please do now take your seats. We are about to begin. Deputies, please do now take your seats. We are about to begin. Oh, now you tell us. Good idea. Thank you. Excellent. How are you? Okay, I'm glad you're here, and that's enough. If we overrun, yes. We won't try if we overrun, because we've got Mark. No, we're certainly. He's 5 minutes and he's. Down. You have the meeting off, boss. And is it Chak now? Ah, fine. It's Chak. So I'm going to introduce the ambassador first. He'll speak from there for 5 minutes. And then I'll introduce you. And you also want to speak from there? Or would you be more comfortable there? It does work? But if you're comfortable, that one looks better.
Well, introduce myself.
Marie, you've got the meeting off. We're not sitting up here. Oh, apologies. Fine. Deputies, we are now ready to begin. Please do take your seat. Good afternoon, Deputies. Good afternoon, Deputies, and welcome to this second part of our Board of Deputies May meeting. For those in the Jewish community who are staying but who aren't Deputies, welcome. Please do stay and join us. My name is Richard. I am the Senior Vice President of the Board of Deputies of British Jews and also the Chair of the International Division. So it gives me great pleasure to chair this part of our meeting. Around this time of the year, every year, we commemorate Yom HaZikaron and celebrate Yom HaAtzmaut, Israel's Memorial and Independence Days. 2017, of course, marks a number of significant additional anniversaries. And so today, to celebrate both Israel's 69th birthday and to also mark the 50th anniversary of the Six-Day War, the Board of Deputies International Division has put together a short programme. Firstly, as has become almost a Board of Deputies minhag around Yom HaAtzmaut, we are honoured to be joined once again by the Israeli Ambassador, His Excellency Mark Regev. Since arriving in the UK, as I'm sure you will all have seen, the Ambassador has made it his business to travel the length and breadth of the United Kingdom, putting Israel's case forward, particularly on campus, where he has been extremely active, exercising his right to free speech at universities all around Britain, including, as we heard in the election hustings, Ambassador, you got an appearance, a shout-out at SOAS recently, where a number of us here from the Board of Deputies also joined you. Ambassador, we are delighted once again to welcome you to the Board of Deputies and look forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you very, very much. President of the Board, Jonathan. Jonathan and me met earlier this morning, so this is the second time I'm seeing him today, and it's always good to see Jonathan. Chief Executive Gillian Meron, Rabbonim, deputies, friends, it is really a great pleasure to be back here with you all, and it's a special pleasure because, as you all know, we are celebrating Israel's Independence Day, and we're moving very closely towards Yom Yerushalayim, when we celebrate half a century, 50 years, to the reunification of the city. And we have with us a veteran of the 1967 Six-Day War, Dr. Yitzhak Yifat. And I know I speak for all of you when we know that it was Dr. Yifat's generation, brave young men who fought, and some of them were injured, and some of them didn't come back, but because of their valor, because of their bravery, Israel prevailed in 1967 and liberated Jerusalem. We say thank you, Dr. Yifat. We are now a fortnight before Yom Yerushalayim, and when we cast our thoughts back 5 decades and we reflect upon that period, on the war and the liberation of Jerusalem, often in a very simplistic way we look at it as a great victory. And indeed, in many ways, it was a great victory. But as you all know, often the truth, the real story, is far more complicated. In the weeks immediately prior to that conflict, the atmosphere in Israel wasn't one of assured victory. On the contrary, there was a great concern in Israel. President Nasser, the president of Egypt, had apparently united the Arab world. He had assembled a formidable military force, and their declared aim was the obliteration of the young Jewish state. The Arab media broadcast footage of angry crowds flooding the streets of Cairo, Damascus, Beirut, and Amman, demanding that the Jews be thrown into the sea. And in the face of that very real threat and that hostility, the 2.5 million Jews living in the state of Israel were facing what was perceived to be a very real threat of annihilation. So make no mistake, this was a time of great concern. And the war that resulted was necessary to lift a very dangerous stranglehold of the surrounding countries on the young state of Israel. In the words of Yitzhak Rabin, who was then Chief of Staff of the IDF and later on, as you know, became Defense Minister and Prime Minister, in the words of Yitzhak Rabin, it was a war to ensure our people's very existence in our homeland and the right of the Jewish state to exist in peace and security. Set against that backdrop, Israel's victory is indeed even more extraordinary. When our people prevailed, Jerusalem, our eternal capital, was reunited. And friends, Jerusalem's reunification is a triumph that we should encourage others to celebrate with us. For when Jerusalem was reunited, the then Defense Minister Moshe Dayan gave a very solemn pledge. I quote from his words from June 1967. To our Christian and Muslim fellow citizens, we solemnly promise full religious freedom and rights. We do not come to Jerusalem for the sake of other people's holy places and not to interfere with the adherents of other faiths. That pledge continues to be fulfilled today. Since 1967, people of all faiths have been welcomed to Jerusalem, and all the religious sites of all communities have been protected, with each religious site being autonomously administered by the respective religious group. So in Jerusalem today, the Christian holy sites are administered autonomously by the various churches, the Jewish religious sites are administered by the rabbinate, and the Islamic religious sites are administered by the Muslim Waqf. Each site independently and autonomously administered by the relevant religious authority. And these arrangements have been enshrined in Israeli law, with the status quo being preserved and maintained. We should remind people that in the 19 years leading up to 1967, the story was unfortunately very different. Jews were not welcome in their holy places in Jerusalem. In fact, they were forbidden to visit their holy places in Jerusalem. And in parallel, the Christian population of Jerusalem more than halved, down from 31,000 to only 12,000. Now, unfortunately, some international organizations are all too keen to dismiss both our people's 3,000-year-long bond with Jerusalem and Israel's proud record of preserving freedom in Jerusalem. And in recent months, one organization in particular has ratcheted up a campaign to dismiss the Jewish connection to Jerusalem and to delegitimize Israel's sovereignty. I speak, of course, of UNESCO. In November, UNESCO referred to Israel as an occupier in our people's spiritual, historic, and cultural capital. In doing so, they denied the 3,000-year-long connection between the Jewish people and our holy sites in Jerusalem. They omitted any reference to it. And earlier this month, they reiterated the Jewish state was somehow an occupier in our people's most cherished city. We must call UNESCO's campaign out for what it really is: historically illiterate, deeply offensive, and fundamentally unjust. And I'm sure the Board of Deputies joins with me in thanking the UK government for standing up for truth and in voting against that one-sided anti-Israel resolution at UNESCO. But our work is not done yet, and that is why we must continue to remind others of Israel's proud record, a record of upholding religious freedom and enshrining tolerance and pluralism for all of Jerusalem's visitors and residents. And here, with your permission, I want to remind you of a fact that unfortunately is not common knowledge. In 2011 and 2015, polls of Arabs living in East Jerusalem were commissioned by the Council of Foreign Relations and the Palestinian Center for Public Opinion, respectively. Neither organization is known for being a Zionist surrogate. When East Jerusalem Palestinians were asked the following question: given the choice becoming a citizen of a Palestinian state or of Israel, with the respective rights and privileges that each option would provide, a striking trend emerged in both polls. In 2011, a plurality of Arab respondents chose Israel over a possible citizenship in a Palestinian state. And in 2015, a majority chose the same path. 52% of Arabs in East Jerusalem chose they would prefer to be under Israeli sovereignty. The idea somehow that the East Jerusalem Arabs are just waiting, praying for the day that Israel will pull out, leave, that is simply a myth. Increasingly, Arab East Jerusalemites feel that in our region, where freedom is scarce, Israel stands out as a nation that can be relied upon to protect their freedom. Friends, this is a seminal year in the history of the Jewish state. It is one we should celebrate with great pride and joy, and it is one that I hope we will all share with others, because the freedom Israel has brought to Jerusalem is something they can cherish too. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ambassador, thank you once again for your words and for joining us today. We know about the significance and centrality of Jerusalem and indeed the city's tolerance for all religions. I want to thank the Ambassador, and he has a number of other speaking engagements this very day, hence he can't stay with us now. And of course, the Board of Deputies did indeed write to the government ahead of the UNESCO vote, and indeed wrote again to thank the British government for the way it voted after the deplorable UNESCO resolution. Thank you very much to the Israeli Ambassador, Mark Greger, for joining us. For 6 days in June 1967, millions of Israelis and Jews around the world held their collective breath. Surrounded by 5 hostile Arab states and supported indeed by more than half a dozen other countries, the young country of Israel, then just 19 years old, fought for its survival. Almost miraculously, Israel emerged victorious, having retaken the old city of Jerusalem, home, as we've heard, to Judaism's most holy sites. Fighting to protect their country's very existence were young Israeli soldiers, many of whom were not much older than the state of Israel itself. One of those heroes is sat next to me right now. Dr. Itzhak Ifat was born in 1943 in Tel Aviv. He grew up, of course, to witness the establishment of the modern state of Israel. He completed mandatory army service in 1964, only to be called up once again 3 years later in 1967 as a member of the elite IDF
Paratrooper Division. Yitzhak was among the group of paratroopers who liberated the Kotel, the Western Wall, and whose image you can see now behind me, which was captured in the famous photograph taken by David Rubinger. Following a degree, I'm told, Yitzhak, in medicine, specializing in gynecology, Yitzhak was awarded the Medal of Excellence in 1994 for his work from the Israeli Medical Association. After retiring, he continued to volunteer as a doctor in the IDF, particularly in the southern city of Sderot, which we all know so much about, through the difficult years of rocket bombardment. Yitzhak, in addition to all of that, has been a passionate goodwill ambassador for Israel for many years, sharing his memories and the courageousness of the Israeli people with thousands of people around the world. Yitzhak, it truly is an honor to have you address us today, and the floor is very much yours. Thank you.
Honored guests, ladies and gentlemen, it is wonderful to be with you today. When I think of the months leading up to the Six-Day War in 1967, those were very difficult days for Israel. The state was under siege, a heavy atmosphere had fallen over the people, and the air was so tense you could have cut it with the knife. There was a feeling that a great catastrophe approaching. No men were seen on the streets. All the neighbors had disappeared as well, and only a heavy feeling deep in our hearts remained. How was it? How was that everybody is being called up but not us? We, the paratroopers, an elite army unit, famous for our power and courage in battle, known to be the spearhead of the Israeli army, were still at home, beginning to have doubt about the trust that the state had placed in our abilities. What's happening? Why are we still at home? Don't you need us? And the coordination of the battalion calmed us down patiently, one after one, and without losing his temper, guys, don't worry. While you are still at home, the war won't begin. However, every passing day made the anticipation harder and harder. Then, on the 23rd of May, 1967, I returned home after walking my girlfriend back from the university. The truth is that day, my heart was predicting bad news. Only few minutes passed from the moment I closed the door till somebody rang the doorbell. When I opened the door, two young Gardner volunteers, a boy and girl, stood in front of me with the long-desired call-up order in their hands. A storm of emotions overwhelmed my heart, and it began beating so strong it could have burst through my chest. I just wanted to give these two volunteers, my saviors from isolation, a big kiss and fatherly hug. That officially declared as, In the beginning, the army gathered us in the camp next to Lod Airport. We pitched our tents, improvised a sort of field showers, and all of this with the constant arguing typical of Jewish people. We discussed the meaning of the siege, the ways and possibilities to solve the current problems. Others were occupied with their own personal problems, like not having been able to say goodbye to friends and relatives who will care for the crops in field. However, how will I be replaced in the milking shed? There were no men at all in the farms and in the factories. There was a serious and constant worry about how agriculture and industry would continue working, while in the hands of the young sons of the soldiers. But not all sons stayed home. Schechter, a soldier from the battalion, was a sophomore medical student who studied in Italy. He arrived in Israel and joined the reservist lines directly. He never had the chance to inform his parents of his return. Schechter told us that at all the airport in Italy, Israelis were fighting to board planes leaving for their homeland in order to return to the country to protect her. Unfortunately, several days later, Schechter was killed in battle for Jerusalem. Meanwhile, in the camp, we began to organize campfire at night and sang songs to break the tense atmosphere of anticipation and uncertainty that filled the country. One night, we gathered all together, and our commander, Yossi Yafe, may his memory be blessing, brought us the battle plans for our battalion. We were commanded to parachute into El Arish area, to capture the city and cut from there deep into Sinai. The next morning, we practiced the operation on a model and later moved to the field of Kibbutz Givat Brenner, situated next to the Tel Nof military airport. There we were given our parachute and all the necessary equipment. Everyone measured and fitted the straps of the parachute, and we received the order to board the airplanes. My heart was beating with excitement. Here I was to have my first operational parachute jump deep behind the Egyptian front lines. At that point, I was a squad commander in the paratroopers, and I felt my soul was ready for this mission. Finally, after so many years of training, the moment of truth had come, the climax of the dream of every fighter in the battalion. Don't get me wrong, with the paratroopers, not war lovers, but at the moment that there is necessity to transform all the training and practice, including real parachute jumping, into reality, this really elevates the soul of the paratrooper. We were preparing to board the buses that should have taken us to the airport with all the equipment and the parachutes, when we saw our commander walking around with sad face. It seemed he lacked the strength to bring us the bad news, but he turned to us and said, "Listen, We thought the Jordanians would fire their heavy guns and that will be the extent of their war. However, it turns out King Hussein of Jordan is pounding our positions ferociously and we have taken many casualties. Because of that, our mission has changed. The parachute drop over El Arish has been cancelled. In a couple of minutes, we are heading for Jerusalem. I thought my world was collapsing. After all the instructions and the mental preparedness, we had to change direction. With tears in my eyes, I accepted the new orders. We peeled the parachutes and the equipment in big stacks and headed for Jerusalem. Passing on our way, the airfield and the planes that minutes ago had waited for us. At first, our morale was very, very down because of the anger and disappointment, but then our driver intentionally turned the radio on the Egyptian radio station in order to lift our spirit. The Egyptian announcer was boasting how the Israeli planes were dropping like fleas and other information of that sort. We knew what was true and what was lie, so the radio broadcast only made us burst with laughter. On the outskirts of Jerusalem, we heard the noise of falling artillery shells over the capital. We had no time for instructions and nobody even thought to mention a practice on a model. While still advancing with the bus, we were briefed about the positions we had to attack. In the middle of the night, we arrived at Bet Kerem area in Jerusalem, and heavy artillery shower welcomed us. But at that moment, knowing we were about to conquer Jerusalem, it was a moment of excitement and emotion. After 2,000 years of submission and exile, we were about to regain Jerusalem. It was the dream of every one of us, and we were about to achieve it. It was an uplifting moment. I knew at that moment that we would recapture Jerusalem and also the Western Wall. At Bet Kerem, we got off the buses and organized in platoons and companies. Minutes after we arrived, women ran out their houses and offered us hot coffee and homemade cookies. They also offered us to call our homes from their telephones. It was really touching to see how the people were embracing us with such love. At that moment, I had a personal problem. I got a very acute and painful toothache. I felt really uncomfortable to mention it to anyone. I thought, what will my comrades say and think if I start complaining about a toothache minutes before entering the battle? Luckily, I didn't have to wait too long for my deliverance. The woman who came out of the apartment close to our gathering point brought us a pot of hot coffee like the other woman, and then looked at us and said, "Soldiers, my husband, Dr. Beinart, is a dentist. If anyone needs a treatment, they are welcome." I jumped as a snake bit me towards the dentist clinic. In a matter of seconds, I was in a patient chair. The dentist gave me a local sedative injection and the pain disappeared. Then Dr. Beinart looked at me and said, "Listen, if you recapture the Kotel, you can come back to me and we'll treat your teeth for the rest of your life." The Kotel, as you already know, we captured, but I didn't take advantage of the generous offer of Dr. Beinart. We began our advance toward Givat HaTachmoshet, the ammunition hill, and the sky was full of colorful arcs from the artillery shells fired. Under the command of Dodik, our company commander, we reached our first goal. From there, we had to run for 200-300 meters to an open area with nothing to protect us, to break through a number of fences in order to attack the left flank of the enemy. When the order to attack was given, the whole company broke running through the empty field. The fire of the enemy was like hell. My good friend Yair Goldberger from Kibbutz Haogen hit by bazooka shell in the chest and died. We continued to advance toward our objective, and at about 2:30 a.m., I entered the Neo-Jordanian trenches of Ammunition Hill. I felt I was walking on bodies. I assumed they were bodies of Jordanian soldiers, but it was possible in the heat of the battle that we unintentionally stepped over the bodies of our comrades as well. The trenches were so narrow that there was hardly any space to move. And around us there was a treacherous barrage of enemy fire. We had to advance and neutralize the enemy. In such moment, you forget about fear and you only think about how to achieve your mission. In front of me was a friend, Ilan. He was hit by a bullet on his buttocks. When I saw that he was about to be shot again, I moved faster than the Jordanian soldier and shot him first. Then I took hold of Ilan and dropped him inside the trenches. There was no possibility to treat the wounded at that time. Deep in the battle, next to the curve in the trench, I ran out of bullets in my machine gun and stopped to reload. At that moment, a Jordanian soldier saw me and attacked me with the bayonet attached to his gun. Instinctively, I pushed away his gun, giving him a massive hit with my machine gun and disabling him. The war at the Ammunition Hill was face to face with the enemy. It was a brutal war of life and death. The trenches were very narrow and you were shot at from every direction. You were trampling on the bodies without knowing if they were the bodies of friends or enemies. Later on, we counted the casualties and realized we had lost many of our good friends in that battle. At dawn, Ammunition Hill was in our hands. From there, we continued toward Har HaTzofim, Mount Scopius, and Augusta Victoria. There we lost a good friend, one of our commanders, Giora Ashkenazi, Alav Shalom. I won't prolong this part of the story. It is painful to recall so many friends who are no longer with us. We are only a few minutes inside the walls of the old city when from the head of the column somebody called for a paramedic. We thought that it was for a wounded soldier, and several paramedics ran forward the call. But then they called, bring in the doctor. Our battalion doctor, Uri Frand, who was killed later in Yom Kippur or in a helicopter crash, one of the greatest doctors and fighters I have ever known, ran to the front of the column with his doctor's backpack. It turned out that in one of the small side streets, an Arab woman was about to give birth and was ailing with pains. Uri approached her and with unbelievable calmness helped her relax and give birth to a healthy little girl, Mazal Tov. It later turned out she was a Jewish woman married to an Arab man. Uri had delivered a new Jewish life into the world. From there, we directed our advance toward Har HaBayit, the Temple Mount, and as you surely know, we entered the old city through the Lion's Gate and went down the stairs to the Kotel, the Western Wall. We didn't face any real opposition there except for the sharpshooters who were very hard to trace. What can I say about the moment reached the Western Wall, the Kotel? I was so emotional, so excited. I thought about my grandfather, who was an observant Jew. All of the history of the Jewish people passed before my eyes. I remember the story about Rabbi Yehuda Halevi, who reached Jerusalem in the Middle Ages and bent down to kiss the ground and was trampled to death at the moment by horsemen. I looked up at those huge old stones. I could they only speak. If could they only speak. So mighty, so holy, so impressive. It was an unreal feeling to reach out and touch the stones in the magnificent wall. All of us, the paratroopers, were so excited. We had managed to reverse 2,000 years of slavery of the Jewish people. It was unbelievable. Unbelievable. I must say something about the famous photo. I hardly noticed it at the time. As we were walking, suddenly David Rubinger, the photographer, lay down in the narrow alleyway and took the photo of myself and two of my friends, Moshe Oshri and Zion Karasanti, but it was never planned. It was a complete surprise when it became so well known. At the end of the war, we returned to Ammunition Hill. Our commander, Yossi Yaffe, of blessed memory, gathered us as well at the top of the hill, and with choked voice, we remembered the names of all our friends who fell in that war. At the end of the ceremony, each of us picked up several stones and we made a monument in the form of helmet. After we honored the friends we had lost, we went to the other side of the hill and erected a smaller monument in memory of the Jordanian legionnaires because they had fought like real soldiers, and we, as the enemies, were able to testify that. Unfortunately, that monument is no longer in place. I don't know who removed it, but it is important to know that we Jewish soldiers paid our respect the Jordanian soldiers with a small monument. I was blessed with a wonderful and brave comrades as well as amazing family. I married my wonderful wife, Chassia, Zichronah Livracha, in 1968, and we were blessed with 3 beautiful daughters, Orly, Naama, and Reut. I now have 9 grandchildren, Baruch Hashem. I specialized as a surgeon gynecologist and became a senior doctor in labor ward in Jerusalem, bringing children into world. In this way, the circle was closed as we entered Jerusalem. Uri Frand delivered a child, a new life, and this is what I did for the rest of mine. Even after my wife, Chassia, passed away, may she rest in peace. I hope I managed to give you a part of my memories, and thank you for listening.
Wow. Where to begin? Thank you, first and foremost, Itzhak, for sharing that powerful story with us. I'm sure that deputies like me could have heard you speak in even more detail and for even longer. You capture the terror of war, you capture the tragedy of losing friends, but you've obviously not lost your sense of humour. Despite everything that you've been through. I want to also thank you, deputies won't know this, Itzhak got on a plane at stupid o'clock this morning in order to make sure that he would land on time to be with us today, so thank you. If, like me, you would like to hear more, then thanks to our friends at the WZO and also the ZF, we have arranged a speaking tour for Itzhak over the next few days. Please do come along, please do tell your fellow deputies, please do tell friends and family in Manchester, in Leeds, in Birmingham, and again here in London. You have details on your seats. Please do promote it, please do help fill the room with the audience that Itzhak deserves. And in addition, if you are a social media fan, on the back of your piece of paper, please do join the 6-day war social media campaign. The Board of Deputies, together with the Jewish Leadership Council and the Jewish Chronicle, is embarking on a social media campaign to feed real-life events, exactly as they happened 50 years ago, onto your Twitter and Facebook feeds. Please do join that. The final part of our commemoration will be led by Ilana and then Edwin.
Good afternoon. I'm Ilana Davis from Birmingham Progressive Synagogue. War and conflict is never without the loss of life. We light this memorial candle to commemorate all the Israeli soldiers who died in the Six-Day War and in previous and subsequent conflicts. We also remember all the victims of terror and innocent civilians who have lost their lives in the conflict, whether Arab or Israeli, Druze, Christian, Muslim, or Jewish.
Edwin Shuker, Vice Chair of the International Division. This iconic picture behind me has been described as the most beloved and recognized Jewish photographic image of our time. But the illustrious photographer, David Rubinger, who took it, made not a single penny out of it. And in a Supreme Court decision, which was both a tribute and a loss for him, it declared as follows: that this picture has now become the property of the entire nation. And they could have added, it has become the property of the entire Jewish people. David Rubinger was much more than a photographer. He was a journalist, a peace activist, and he was the chronicler of Israel. It was the wish of our division to invite him on this commemoration day. David Rubinger passed away on March the 2nd, 2017. Yeheh Zechro Baruch. I will now recite the El Maleh Rachamim on the souls of the martyrs of all conflicts. Thank you for anticipating. Would you please stand up? El Maleh Rachamim, שוכן במרומם, המציא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירם, לשנשמות הקדושים שנלחמו בכל מערכות ישראל, במחברת ובצבא הגנה לישראל, ושנפלו במלחמתם ומסרו נפשם על קדושת השם, העם והארץ, בעבור שאנו מתפללים לעילוי נשמתם. לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירם בסתר כנפיו לעולמים ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתם. אדוני הוא נחלתם וינוחו בשלום על משכבתם. ונאמר אמן. Will you please stay standing for a minute of silence, starting now.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ido Ben Shaul. I'm a British Israeli. I'm a deputy for West London Synagogue of British Jews and a member of the International Division that had the privilege of organizing this event. First and foremost, of course, I would like to thank Yitzhak for coming all this way to share his story with us. Toda Yitzhak. I'm sure he has done this many, many times, so it was good to see that it is still so vivid and moving as it was 50 years ago. Having Yitzhak here is, of course, a great privilege, as the picture of him and his comrades came to symbolize the war's most poignant moment. Whilst the whole war lasted just a moment of our history, as a whole, it was one of those of these monumental events remembered by all who lived through it and people that came afterwards. As Ambassador Regev and Yitzhak himself already mentioned, it culminated a long, stressful, and scary period known in Hebrew as the Hamtana, or the waiting, when the people of much smaller than Israel knew something was about to happen, but no one quite knew when and to what extent. When the war actually broke out, it had the potential to wipe the tiny Jewish states off the map. So the miracle of the war, its shortness, the rapid pace of events, each one of them of massive and historical significance, the feeling of progress and reclaimed hope, all had a huge and lasting impact on all of us that lived through it and on the generations to come. Being unaware of the long-term aftermath of the war was a blessing in the late 1960s. It was one of the only moments in Israeli history when happiness or even euphoria ruled. It affected us all, including 6-year-old me. And I remember details so clearly, much more so than what I remember from the Yom Kippur War that came not so many years later when I was only 12, and even the Lebanon War when I was a technical officer of the IIF in active service, albeit, of course, far from the front. I will forever remember my dad, Zichrono Livracha, who was a born Jerusalemite of many generations, crying his eyes out when his city opened up, and taking us to a whirlwind tour straight after the war through the alleys of his childhood in the old city of Jerusalem and into the West Bank. So regardless of how we view the war today, especially as it brought about the biggest political schism in the short history of the State of Israel, and as much as we rightly mourn all its casualties, let us cherish these few moments of collective happiness and relief in much the same way as we cherish this ancient revolt the Maccabees carried out against the Romans. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ido, and indeed thank you to everybody who has helped put the ceremony together, both deputies on the International Division and also the professional team. Before I invite Jonathan to close the meeting, just a word on the organisational changes. I hope deputies would appreciate that even the Board of Deputies could not have anticipated a general election being called on the 8th of June, which is why we felt it important to run the hustings, even though that now means, of course, we won't be discussing the organisational changes. What I hope to do, therefore, is to put that straight into the June meeting. Please, before then, do take a look, if you've not already done so, at the votes that we're going to be looking at in making our organisation even more effective than it is today. Thank you. Jonathan.
Deputies, I'm glad we took the decision to suspend normal business today. There are some moments in Jewish history that are so seminal that I think we need to remember and to reflect. I'm glad that we're closing this meeting today in the presence of Dr. Rifat, having heard the Israeli ambassador and with the Yortzeit light there, because I think it's important for us to reflect soberly on the events of the Six-Day War, not in a sense of triumphalism, but in a sense of hope. I'm older than most of you here, of course. I was 12 years old at the Six-Day War, and I can remember the sense of deep foreboding that I gained from my family and community. And today, thanks to the heroism of Dr. Ifat and his comrades, Jerusalem is reunited. May it always be reunited. May it always be the capital of the Jewish people and the Jewish people's homeland in the State of Israel. When we next meet on June the 25th in the afternoon, we will have had the general election, and we will also have just come past the visit of the President of the United States to Israel. What that will bring, anyone can guess. But thank you for joining us today. As deputies, or whether not deputies, I think we have had an absolutely remarkable meeting which will stay in our memories, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you very much indeed.